thought they could take something that wasn't theirs. But when the HOA claimed Daniel's private road, they didn't know he had a plan that would leave the entire neighborhood in shock. Daniel was the kind of man who believed in building things with his own hands. He wasn't wealthy or powerful, but he had pride in the little he owned. The most precious part of his property wasn't his house, or even his garden. It was the narrow stretch of road that connected his home to the main street. Years ago, when he first bought the land, that road was nothing more than a rocky dirt path. Cars would bump and shake over it, tires scraping against loose stones. Daniel remembered how many times he had driven on it, feeling embarrassed whenever friends visited. They'd tease him, "Man, this road's gonna break my car before we even reach your house." But Daniel wasn't the kind of man to complain. He saved money for months, skipped vacations, worked weekends, and finally hired a small crew to help him pave the road. He didn't stop there. He added flower beds on both sides, planting roses and daffodils that bloomed in the spring. Later, he installed little solar lights along the edges, so the path would glow warmly at night. To the neighbors, it became a pleasant sight. Families would stroll past and admire the flowers, children would race their bikes over the smooth pavement, and cars would glide down it without trouble. Everyone loved the road, everyone except they forgot one thing. It didn't belong to the community. It belonged to Daniel. For years, Daniel quietly maintained it. Every winter, he shoveled the snow alone. Every summer, when cracks appeared, he patched them with fresh tar. His neighbors drove over it daily, but none of them ever stopped to thank him. Still, Daniel didn't mind. He wasn't doing it for applause. He was doing it because it was his responsibility. But everything changed. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel stepped out of his front door, coffee mug in hand, ready to enjoy the peaceful morning air. As he walked toward the main street, his eyes caught something that didn't belong. At the entrance of his road, a shiny new metal sign had been hammered into the ground. He froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. HOA property. Residents only. Daniel blinked, reading it again, hoping his eyes were deceiving him. But no, it was real. Fresh bolts glistened in the sunlight, and the ground beneath the post was still disturbed from where they had dug the hole. His hands tightened around the coffee mug, and his heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be true. That road was in his deed. It was part of his property. He had paid for it, built it, cared for it, and now, without a word, the HOA had claimed it as their own. He marched closer, inspecting the sign. It looked official, as though the board had ordered it custom-made. The arrogance of it all made his blood boil. Not once had anyone from the HOA come to his door to discuss it. Not once had they asked for his consent. They had simply decided that his property now belonged to them. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the sign. His neighbors' cars zipped past, their tires humming along the smooth pavement he had built. A woman waved at him casually as she drove by, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced his living room, his mind racing with questions. How could they do this? Did they think he was too quiet to fight back? Did they assume he wouldn't notice? He opened his filing cabinet, pulling out his deed, spreading papers across his table. Line after line confirmed it. The road was legally his. But legal ownership didn't matter if the entire community believed otherwise. For the first time in years, Daniel felt small, invisible in his own neighborhood. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "They don't know who they're dealing with. This is my road, and I won't let them take it." The next HOA meeting came faster than Daniel expected. He had circled the date on his calendar in bold red ink, not because he was excited to go, but because he knew it would be the battleground where his voice would finally be heard. For days, he prepared himself. His dining table turned into a war desk, covered in property deeds, maps, old maintenance bills, and photographs of him repairing the road. Each document was a weapon, each paper a shield. That evening, Daniel buttoned up his shirt, tucked his folder of proof under his arm, and walked into the HOA's meeting hall. It was a large room, brightly lit but cold, with rows of folding chairs filled by neighbors who chatted casually as if nothing unusual had happened. The board members sat at the front behind a long table, their posture confident, their faces unreadable. As Daniel entered, a few people glanced his way. Some smiled politely, others avoided his gaze, already having chosen sides. He could feel the weight of whispers behind him, like ripples spreading across a pond. When it was time for residents to speak, Daniel stood up. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "I have something to address," he began, holding up his folder. "The road leading from my property to the main street, it's mine. I've maintained it for years. I've paid for it, and I have every document to prove it." He opened the folder, pulling out papers one by one, showing the deed, the surveyor's map, even photos of him shoveling snow and filling potholes. "This road is not HOA property. It never has been. You had no right to claim it." For a moment, silence filled the room. Some neighbors leaned forward, curious. Others crossed their arms, already skeptical. Then the HOA president, a tall man with silver hair and a polished suit, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Mr. Daniel," he said smoothly, "that road serves the community. Residents use it daily. It's become part of our neighborhood. And therefore, it belongs to us." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not how property works. Ownership doesn't change because people use it. It's still mine." The president's smile widened, his tone dripping with condescension. "Sometimes we have to think of the greater good, not individual interests." A few neighbors clapped quietly. Others murmured their agreement. A woman in the second row raised her voice. "Why should you keep the road to yourself when the rest of us use it every day? It's selfish." Daniel's hands clenched around his papers. "Selfish? I've spent my own money repairing that road while you all drove over it without ever offering help. Every winter I shoveled snow by myself while you enjoyed the cleared path. Every summer I patched cracks so your cars wouldn't break an axle. And now you call me selfish because I won't hand it over?" His words hung heavy in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably, but the board remained unmoved. The treasurer, a stern-looking woman with sharp glasses, shook her head. "The HOA has decided. That road is community property now." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "You can't just decide that. You can't take what isn't yours." His voice echoed through the hall. The president raised his hand, silencing him. "We're done discussing this. If you don't like it, file a complaint. But as far as this board is concerned, the matter is settled." The meeting moved on, but Daniel didn't hear another word. He stood there, surrounded by people he thought were neighbors, realizing they had chosen convenience over truth. He gathered his papers slowly, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with restrained fury. As he walked out of the hall, the whispers followed him. "He's overreacting. He should let it go. It's just a road. Just a road." The phrase echoed in his mind as he stepped into the cool night air. To them, it was just a road. To him, it was proof of his effort, his ownership, his independence, and they had dismissed it as nothing. Daniel walked home under the streetlights, his folder pressed against his chest. He had lost the battle that night, but in his heart, he knew the war was far from over. The HOA thought they had silenced him, but they had only lit a fire that was about to consume everything they had built. Daniel sat at his desk long after midnight, the quiet hum of the clock filling the silence. His house felt colder than usual, as if the weight of the HOA's arrogance had seeped into the walls. The folder of documents still lay in front of him, spread across the table like scattered pieces of his dignity. His deed, the survey maps, receipts from contractors, photos of him working alone under the blazing sun or in the bitter cold. All of it screamed the truth. The road was his. Yet the memory of the meeting gnawed at him. The smug grin of the president, the dismissive wave of the treasurer's hand, the whispers of his neighbors calling him selfish. Each moment replayed like a cruel echo. For years, he had quietly carried the burden of that road, expecting nothing in return. But when he needed the community to acknowledge his efforts, they had turned their backs on him. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a tired hand through his hair. Outside his window, the road stretched into the darkness, lined with parked cars that weren't his. He counted them one by one, 8, 9, 10 vehicles resting comfortably on land that belonged to him. Their owners slept soundly in warm houses, completely unaware of the storm brewing in his mind. He whispered to himself almost bitterly, "They think it's theirs now. They think I'll just give up." His voice cracked with exhaustion, but his eyes hardened with determination. He stood up and walked outside into the cool night air. The moonlight cast shadows on the pavement, illuminating every crack he had filled, every edge he had trimmed. His footsteps echoed in the stillness as he walked the length of the road, his road. Each car he passed was like a silent insult, a reminder of how little the board respected him. By the time he returned to his porch, his decision was made. He couldn't fight arrogance with words alone. He needed to act. He needed to remind them all that ownership meant something. Back inside, Daniel grabbed his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found the number of a local towing service he had once used when his old truck broke down. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. The line rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Midtown Towing, how can I help you?" Daniel took a deep breath. "This might sound unusual," he began, "but I need you to tow cars parked on my private property. Not just one car, dozens." There was silence on the line. Then the man chuckled. "Dozens? Sir, we'll need proof before we can touch a single vehicle." "I have proof," Daniel replied quickly. "I'll email you my deed, property maps, and maintenance records. The HOA tried to claim my road, but it's mine. I can prove it in black and white." The man's tone shifted, more serious now. "All right, send me the documents. If it checks out, we can help." Daniel sent everything within minutes. The reply came back faster than he expected. "Documents verified. Looks like you're the rightful owner. When do you want us there?" Daniel stared at the message, his pulse quickening. This was it, the moment he decided to fight back. He typed his response with steady hands. "Tomorrow, at dawn." After hanging up, Daniel sat in silence, the weight of his plan sinking in. For the first time since the sign appeared, he felt a flicker of control returning. Tomorrow, the road would no longer be a parking lot for ungrateful neighbors. Tomorrow, he would take back what was his. But even as resolve burned inside him, a small part of him hesitated. He knew the chaos it would cause, the outrage, the accusations. The HOA would not forgive this easily, yet he also knew that if he backed down now, he would forever live under their thumb, his property treated as community property, his voice ignored. Daniel looked out the window once more at the line of cars glistening under the moonlight. He pictured them gone, leaving the road empty and silent, exactly as it should be. A slow smile spread across his face. "This time," he whispered, "they'll remember who owns this road." And with that, he turned off the lamp, leaving the documents neatly stacked on the desk. For the first time in weeks, Daniel closed his eyes and allowed himself to rest, not because the fight was over, but because he finally knew how to win it. The neighborhood was still asleep when the first rumble broke the silence. It was faint at first, like distant thunder rolling across the sky, but it grew louder with every passing second. Daniel stood on his porch, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, watching as the headlights of 3 massive tow trucks appeared at the far end of the street. Their engines growled through the cool morning air, steady and unrelenting. The drivers didn't need much direction. Daniel had already shown them the property lines, the proof, the paperwork that gave him every right. As the trucks pulled in, the flashing amber lights bathed the road in an eerie glow. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long while: power. One by one, the workers stepped out, nodded at him, and got to work. Chains rattled, hydraulics hissed, and the first car lifted off its wheels. The sound of metal scraping against steel echoed through the stillness of dawn. Daniel held his breath as the vehicle was secured and hauled away, vanishing into the dark. And then another, and another. Each car that disappeared off his road was like a weight lifted from his chest. SUVs, sedans, even a brand new luxury car, all gone. By the time the sun began to rise, the road that had once been crowded with vehicles now stood empty, the asphalt gleaming under the golden light. For the first time in years, Daniel could see the entire stretch of his road without a single obstruction. It looked pure. It looked his. But the peace didn't last long. The first scream shattered the silence. "My car's gone!" a woman shrieked, running barefoot across her lawn. Moments later, a man stormed out of his front door, yelling, "Who would steal in this neighborhood?" Within minutes, the entire street was awake. Doors slammed, lights flickered on, people gathered in small groups, panic spreading like wildfire. Daniel watched from his porch as neighbors rushed around, voices overlapping. "This is outrageous! Call the police! Every car is gone!" The HOA president appeared soon after, his face red with fury. He marched straight toward Daniel, finger pointed like a weapon. "You! What did you do?" Daniel remained calm, his arms crossed. "I did what was within my rights." "You had no right to touch those cars," the president barked, his voice cracking with anger. "This is theft." Before Daniel could answer, the wail of sirens filled the street. Police cruisers rolled in, their lights casting blue and red streaks across the empty road. The crowd surged forward, desperate for answers. "He stole our cars," one man shouted. "He called tow trucks in the middle of the night," cried another. "You have to arrest him," the president demanded, his voice trembling with rage. The officers stepped out, trying to calm the chaos. Daniel didn't wait for the noise to die down. He stepped forward, holding the same folder he had carried to the meeting. His voice was steady, almost too calm for the situation. "Officers, these cars were parked on my private property. I have the deed, the maps, and years of maintenance records. The HOA claimed the road was theirs, but legally, it's mine. I had every right to remove trespassing vehicles." The officers exchanged looks. One of them flipped through the documents, scanning each line carefully. The crowd grew restless, leaning in, desperate to hear what would be said. The HOA president crossed his arms, smug, as if expecting the law to side with him. But when the officer finally looked up, his words cut through the tension like a knife. "This road belongs to Mr. Daniel. The towing was lawful. No crime has been committed." A hush fell over the street. Neighbors stared at one another in disbelief. Some muttered under their breath, others simply looked away, ashamed. The president's face turned pale, his confidence draining with every passing second. Daniel stood silently, letting the moment sink in. For once, he didn't have to argue. The truth had spoken for him. The law had spoken for him. As the police packed up their papers and left, the crowd slowly dispersed. Some stormed back into their homes, slamming doors in frustration. Others lingered, whispering quietly, stealing nervous glances at Daniel. The road was empty now, but the silence it carried was heavier than the chaos that had filled it minutes earlier. Daniel turned and walked back to his porch, his footsteps echoing on the asphalt. He paused halfway, glancing down at the clean, unobstructed road stretching before him. For the first time in years, it belonged only to him again. And though the HOA didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of their lesson. The following week, the HOA's meeting hall didn't feel like the same place Daniel had stormed out of just days before. The air was thick with tension, the kind that silences casual chatter and forces people to stare at the floor instead of at one another. The board members sat at the front of the room, but their posture was different now. No smug smiles, no crossed arms of arrogance. They looked smaller, as though the events of the last few days had carved cracks in their confidence. Daniel entered quietly, holding the same folder he had carried every time. But this time, it wasn't clutched in desperation. This time, it was tucked under his arm with calm certainty. He walked slowly toward the front, his boots echoing against the linoleum floor, every step a reminder that he was no longer the man they could dismiss. He stopped before the board and set his folder down gently on the table. Then he looked around the room. The same neighbors who had once whispered behind his back now avoided his eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others stared down at their laps, their cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Daniel cleared his throat. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. All I ever asked for was respect. That road has been mine since the day I bought this property. I built it, I maintained it, and I cared for it while everyone else used it freely. I never charged a dime. I never complained. I simply did my part. But instead of acknowledging that, this board decided to claim what wasn't theirs. His words lingered in the silence. The HOA president fidgeted with a pen, tapping it nervously against the table. The treasurer kept her eyes fixed on the documents, though she clearly wasn't reading them. No one dared to interrupt. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower now, almost steady with finality. You embarrassed me. You dismissed me. You treated me like I didn't matter. But you forgot something important. Truth doesn't bend just because a board votes on it. Property doesn't change hands just because you put up a sign. You crossed a line and you learned what happens when you do. From the back of the room, someone coughed nervously. Another whispered, "He's right." The murmur spread slowly, neighbors exchanging guilty glances. Some who had once sided with the HOA now looked at Daniel with a mix of regret and reluctant respect. Finally, the president spoke, his voice much quieter than usual. "Mr. Daniel, on behalf of the board, He paused, swallowing his pride. "We apologize. The sign has been removed. The matter will not be pursued further." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Daniel gave a single nod. He didn't need their apology to feel vindicated. Their silence, their broken confidence, and their sudden humility were apology enough. The meeting ended quickly after that. People shuffled out, some stopping to offer half-hearted smiles or muttered words of support. Daniel didn't linger. He walked out into the crisp night air, the stars spread wide above him, and for the first time in months, he felt completely at peace. When he returned home, he stood at the entrance of his road. The sign was gone. The cars were gone. The asphalt stretched out, smooth and empty, exactly as he had always intended it to be. He walked its length slowly, his boots crunching against the pavement, every step echoing like a victory drum. He remembered the countless hours he had spent sweating under the sun, patching holes, planting flowers, installing lights. For years, those efforts had been invisible, taken for granted. But now, each detail stood out to him like a badge of honor. This road wasn't just his property. It was a symbol, a reminder that when you stand firm, even against an entire board, you can win. Daniel paused halfway down, taking in the silence. No cars blocking the way. No false sign looming over him. Just his road, his work, his pride. He smiled quietly to himself. "They'll never forget this," he murmured. And he was right. From that day forward, no one in the neighborhood dared to challenge him again. The HOA kept their distance, their authority weakened by the very man they thought they could overpower, and every evening as the solar lights flickered on and the flowers along the roadside swayed in the breeze, Daniel sat on his porch with a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't just taken back his road, he had taken back his dignity.